Hello and welcome. I'm Father Jim Mulroney, and my guest today for this episode of Meet a Columban is Father Tom Rouse, who is currently living in Wellington in New Zealand. Now, Tom was ordained in 1976, and after that, he spent a lot of time working on mission in Fiji. He's one of the, I think maybe the only Columban who has been stationed in all three countries, all three of the major countries which constitute our region of Oceania, which is Fiji, Australia, and as a New Zealander, he's also worked in New Zealand. So welcome, Tom, and thank you very much for giving us time today.
Thank you.
I hope you're keeping well over there still in lockdown.
Yes, we still be able to get around a little bit, but no, we're doing okay.
Okay, Tom, now you were ordained when you were a young man, which was a long time ago, in 1976, and you were appointed to go to Fiji.
Yes.
So could you tell us something about, if you remember, your initial reactions when you first arrived in Fiji? I'm sure it wasn't quite the way you expected it would be.
Yeah,
Were there surprises?
Yeah, I arrived at 1 o'clock in the morning, and the Columbans had forgotten that I was supposed to be coming.
Right, that sounds typical.
Yes, and so I went outside, and after discovering that there wasn't going to be any Columbans meeting me by 1:30 in the morning, I got into a taxi and said to the taxi driver, "Take me to the nearest hotel." Well, I could have walked there, it was just down the road. So I paid an enormous sum of money for this taxi ride for about 200 yards. And then I had the next morning after I got up, took up the phone book and found St. Columbans in the book, and was finally told by one of the Columbans, well, just get a bus and go down to Lautoka, and then from then on, everything went well. But it was
so you felt really welcome and wanted, huh?
yeah. Actually, in the end, it was very great welcome, and they were somewhat embarrassed, but they were very. I was very much made to feel at home.
And then the beginning is always language school.
Yes.
You need to learn to speak languages.
Yes. There were 4 of us in language school. There was Franco, myself, and there was one Maoist priest and one Vincentian Indian priest.
Now, you made it through language school. You learned to speak Fijian, and I've been told by Fijian people you learned to speak it very well.
Yes.
And what kind of work did you go into when you'd finished language school? You went to work in a parish, I think?
Yeah, I was in Parish for the first 4 years.
Now, Bar is up near Nandi Airport, as far as I understand. Is that correct?
Yeah, from Nandi, you go through Lautoka to Bar, yes.
Right, okay. And it's fundamentally, I think, an Indo-Fijian population there. There's a mixture of indigenous Fijian people and the descendants of the indentured workers that were brought by the British sugar barons to work in the cane cutting. And they also speak Hindi. Some people speak Hindi. But your parish, is the majority of the parish make up of Indian descent or indigenous Fijian?
Oh, it would be well over 90% indigenous Fijian. And we had roughly 14 villages, which we visited over a period of time. So most people would probably get to Mass once a month. Some villages were made once every 3 months. So a fair bit of my time was spent visiting people in the villages.
What sort of challenges did you face? What were the challenges that the parish faced that you tried to develop programs or to address while you were working in there?
I suppose the main, one of the major challenges was to kind of bring the town and the villages together and to make them feel that they were one group. And also the young people of the town and the young people of the villages, because the villages can sometimes feel like they are somewhat marginalized from the town. because the parish centre was in the town. And so it was an effort to sort of, as it were, enable the place to work as one. But you still had two different groups. You had the Bosnia Sanavakalotu, which is for the Fijian community, and then the parish council for the town. One of the things I do remember, particularly in Navala and also in Voltua down the seacoast and up in the hills, is that back in my day, in the late 70s, we used to have cyclones, the Dangilamba, the murderous wind, to use the translation of the Fijian term. But it came every 3, 4, 5 years. And I remember being in Navala, and I had 2 hurricanes come one after another, which was very unusual. But we were prepared for that. But it's happening so often now. And the second thing that I'd like to bring to mind is the old people in Navala and also in Voltua, by the way, down on the coast. There were particular people who were very good at detecting the signs of the changes in climate or what was going to happen in the coming year. So they say, oh, there's going to be a lot of fish, or there's going to be a lot of it, and they could see it, and they could see the signs in the trees or in the rivers or what have you. But now that's becoming more and more difficult because the change has happened to such an extent that the traditional signs are no longer so clear as they were in the past. And this has made things, well, it made it very dangerous for the people in those traditional areas. The experience of biodiversity loss in Fiji and the experience of climate change and how we can ensure that by dealing with both these crises together, we can ensure not only a protection of the environment, but also decrease in the intensity and the problems with regard to climate change.
Now, you were in Fiji at an historic moment. There was a coup d'etat.
Yes.
And a military takeover of the government of Fiji. You ended up in prison at that time.
Yes.
So you must have been doing more than teaching catechism.
Well, I was in another parish. I was in the Suva parish of Raiwanga, where I'd gone in 1986. In 1987, the coup took place. And because we were involved in basically speaking out each week, and not just myself, every Saturday, a group of parishioners would get together with me and decide what needed to be said. And we noticed that the army would sit at the back of the church because they were predominantly Methodist and they didn't know when to stand up or sit down or to kneel. So they were actually writing down what I was saying. Yeah. So for about a year or more, that was the case. And they didn't move at that time. But I was caught when I attended a prayer meeting in Sukuna Park in the middle of Suva, along with 17 other people. There were 3 of us Columbans, as well as altogether 18 people were arrested.
So then you were in prison for not a long time, I think.
No, it's only for one night.
Yeah, and then you were asked to leave the country, or you agreed to leave the country.
Well, we were on trial for 9 months, and at the end of the trial, we were given absolute discharge without conviction because the whole thing had been set up. Mm. But then that was in January of 1989, and 3 months later, then I was given 1 week to leave the country.
And you left, and more or less, not immediately, but more or less immediately, your next appointment was in Sydney. Yeah. Where you were assigned to the staff of the seminary that the Columbans ran in Sydney. And also, I think you worked with the Fijian people, the migrant Fijian community in the city. Yeah. The seminary had changed quite a bit since you were there. The type of students or the type of life the students lived was quite different. What did you learn from the students that you were being asked to teach?
well, most of them were people who had been overseas themselves. So it was basically a residential program of renewal for people who had also been on mission for a number of years as well. So, yeah, I would learn from them, from their various missionary experiences. Often enough, I would learn teaching techniques as well, because I wasn't really trained as a teacher, and many of these were teachers who were coming back. So it was a very good time. I really did enjoy my time there at the Columban Mission Institute in Taramara.
And the Fijian community, I can remember we dug a hole one day out the back and roasted a pig in the backyard.
Absolutely, we had seven communities around the city of Sydney. It was just an extraordinary experience. It was built up over a number of years, but it was a powerfully dynamic and animated group. It was a group of people who really enjoyed coming together, and we came together fairly regularly. If there was a funeral or somebody died in Fiji, we would gather on many occasions, and then they celebrated my 25th in Taramara, which that was
quite a day.
Quite a while.
Yeah, it went on for quite a while. I remember somehow or other I got to sit in the front row.
Oh, that's right.
And it's pretty hard to leave from the front row, so you have to stay there.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. And anyway, then you had a time back in Fiji, and now you're living in New Zealand.
Yes.
But Tom, one of the special things about you, there are many special things about you, but one of the extremely special things, if I may put it that way, is that you are deaf.
Yes.
And yet you speak well, you're a good public speaker, a good public communicator. You've learned a foreign language and learned to speak it really well. Are there particular abilities that you think you have developed which have not only assisted you to communicate, but also assisted you to live among people in a foreign culture that's not your own, in a circumstance that's not your own, and to understand their ambitions and their hopes and dreams? Is there some ability that you believe you've been able to develop which has enhanced your ability to do that?
Yeah, I suppose there's a couple of things. One is the sensitivity to people who are marginalized in any way. It basically comes out of the experience of disability. And that has really, it's been a strong drive in me, and it explains my long-term commitment to justice, peace, and the integrity of creation when I first trained in Parish back in 1981. So it's always been a very strong drive for me. That's the first thing. The second thing is storytelling, and that helps in any kind of, particularly in a Fiji context, because around the kava bowl, the ability to tell stories is very important, because it keeps people interested in what you've got to talk about.
This is the Fijian custom of gathering around the bowl to drink the kava or the angona.
Yes.
And talk endlessly.
Yes. And
that's a time of storytelling, is that?
Oh, very much so. I mean, like it's really important to be able to, as it were, preach the gospel, so to speak, not in abstract terms, but in very concrete terms. And the best concrete terms are those that come from stories, you know. So I developed that. But the other thing which I think was very helpful in terms of my own disability is I became very good at the language, basically because one of the difficulties many people have when they are learning language later on in life, as a 24, 25-year-old priest, is that they get very frustrated and embarrassed at not being able to say some of the basic things in the new language or the language that they're trying to learn. And this happened with the people who were learning it with me. But I had great fun because I grew up most of my life with people finding what I said funny. And then when they say, "Oh, sorry, I didn't know you were deaf. You're deaf," and I say, "Well, it's okay. We can laugh together at this." So So when I was learning Fijian, unlike the others who were struggling and frustrated and finding it difficult dealing with the laughter of others, I had great fun. And so, in fact, I ended up, as you say, learning the language fairly well, or not only learning it, but also being so comfortable speaking it,
And not worrying about the response.
No, not at all. It just makes a lot of fun.
Yeah, so I know the Japanese have a saying that hearing a foreigner talk Japanese is like hearing a dog talking. And they always found us pretty funny in many ways in the way we spoke.
Sure.
And that's probably a great advantage, I think, not to feel embarrassed or not to feel inhibited by receiving that kind of response.
Yeah, sure.
Now, I think all of us have disabilities. By and large, they're not always so visible, and we're not so conscious of them and don't pay particular attention to them, and we don't use the benefits or the opportunities that our disabilities offer us. Whereas you had quite an apparent disability, you can't hear, it's quite an apparent disability, and you had to strive and work to do something to learn how to deal with that.
Yeah, well, in fact, I suppose one of the important things is to be able to learn to discover that a disability can be a gift and it can be an advantage. And for me, that was the thing. It was to discover that I was, in a sense, gifted with disability, which may sound very strange to some people, but there is there is a point in what I've said.
Yeah, so I think from now on, we'll talk about you as being enabled by your disability. Huh?
Okay, good on you. Thank you.
So we thank you for your presence today, and thank you for sharing with us, spending time with us, and may you keep well, and God bless you during this time.
Okay, thanks very much, Jim.
We've been talking with Tom Rouse, a Columban from New Zealand who's currently living in Wellington. I'm Jim Mulroney.